Yes, thank you as well. It's a couple of really great speakers to follow up on, so yes, bear with me, be patient. But hopefully it will feel relevant for you. I've got a lot to talk about on this topic. It's something that I'm hugely passionate about, personally, professionally. But what I wanted to do today was really distill, hopefully, some useful nuggets of advice for you as individual people leaders, managers, how you can, in the workplace, have real conversations about this in a constructive, compassionate way. But then also as your role of leaders of gender networks as well. So we'll touch on perhaps what gender networks can do and think about in this space too. And also, obviously, Vanessa's mentioned it, but this topic is obviously can be quite triggering. So just to say that if you do want to step out and take some time out, that's absolutely fine. Just don't feel awkward, just go for it. So why is this needed? Vanessa says that it will affect everyone at some point in their working life, and that's absolutely true. But I kind of wanted to set out the case for why this is necessary from an individual perspective, as an individual employee, but also as an employer too. So thinking about the workforce. So we've got some stats here. Hopefully we'll get a bit of audience participation. So this one on here, the top left, this is from Carers UK. So every single day in the UK, a certain number of people have to quit work because they're having to juggle their unpaid care and responsibilities for a loved one. So this is not your kind of average parent-child relationship. This would be typically caring for someone who's terminally ill or elderly who can't look after themselves. So does anyone want to have a stab at how many people leave the workforce every single day in the UK because they can't juggle the two? 100? Okay, good start. Unfortunately, it's higher. Well, almost 1,000, so 600. 600 people are leaving the workforce every single day in this country alone. So this isn't something that, in a current climate where talent retention, recruitment, attraction, it's really, really tough in many, many sectors, many industries, definitely is within healthcare. We can't afford to do this as employers. We need to think about how we can better support and be more flexible and be more understanding of people when they are going through what can sometimes be months, it can be years, it can also be quite a short period of time of caring for someone. We need to support that employee through that time in their careers. Okay, so moving on to the one next to it. So half of women will be caring for a loved one. Again, this is not a child, this is typically a parent. So half of women will be caring for a loved one by the age of... Oh, interesting, you're kind of lowballing it a little bit. So 46. So half of the women in this room, by the time you reach 46, then you're likely to be caring or have cared for someone. And interestingly, as we can guess, the number for men is 57. So we already know that caring responsibilities will disproportionately affect women and their role at work. So then moving here, research suggests that women should be taking how many weeks off work after a miscarriage? So this is according to SANS, the baby loss charity. 0, 6, 8. So I don't know whether you guys will know or kind of be aware of what HR policies, leave allocation you might have in your organisation, but that's the average number. So thinking about the different types of miscarriage that people experience as well. It can seem like a long time, but actually in their professional career of somebody, do we not value mothers enough to support them through that period so that we can keep them in our organisation? I haven't seen any that they produce, no. But that, yeah, it's a really good point as well. And we talk quite a lot when we run sessions or workshops around baby loss and particularly child loss as well, how it affects men and how that's often not recognised in a workplace. But going back to masculinity in the workplace, what people expect of men at work and how they might react to that. So the last one, that was some research that we did last year about looking at 18 to 34-year-olds and how many would consider actually quitting their job and moving elsewhere if they didn't get the support they expected when someone close to them died. 60, 90, 77. That's more than 3/4. And what was really interesting for us when we did the research was that we fully expected kind of the baby boomers, those of the sandwich generation, to be thinking about this topic and actually thinking that their employer should be supportive if they were bereaved, perhaps if they had an elderly parent, for example. We had no idea that so many of the younger workforce would be thinking about this as well. And I think for us it feels probably symptomatic of the pandemic we've been through and the fact that employee expectations are going through the roof. Younger people are expecting more from their employer, quite rightly, in terms of support. We've seen through COVID more flexibility around where you work, how you work, and the same now applies to different stages in people's lives. And these employees are people. They will be affected at various points by things that happen to them personally. We should be supportive as organisations, and if we are, then our people will stay, they won't vote with their feet. So this is why Hospice UK developed the Compassionate Employers programme. So we run a holistic workplace wellbeing programme. We help organisations look after their people through end of life, through grief, dying and caring. So we help organisations to benchmark where they're at and assess the full experience of employees at end of life or when they're grieving. So we look at their policies, in their employee networks, their peer support, perhaps they have mental health first aiders, how well are they equipped? We look at the EAP provision, we look at what the leadership is saying and doing on this topic. We talk about how openly people in the workplace can talk about and support each other. And then we benchmark that against other organisations that we work with, and then we give them an award, gold, silver or bronze, but more importantly, we give them recommendations on help on how they may then deliver that gold standard level of support for their employees at what can be the toughest times in their lives. Just some of the organisations we work with, typically financial sector, but also now working with NHS partners, ambulance service, housing as well. So these are just a few of the organisations we work with, but there's a growing need for it, and really from a spectrum of different sectors and industries. But what I want to come on to now is, as I said at the outset, just some practical nuggets of advice. We've only got 10-15 minutes here, so it's not going to be a kind of too much depth, but hopefully gives you just some food for thought as people leaders, and perhaps if you are supporting people in your workplace right now, you know people in your teams who are, there might be some practical advice here about how to have these conversations. And the way that we've kind of structured this in terms of our workshops and support that we offer is around having kind of 6 key principles of compassionate bereavement conversations at work. The first one is listening attentively. So we're all aware, I'm sure, of the importance of active listening. But how do we apply this in a bereavement conversation? Well, clearly we need to clear away the distractions, take away our phones, focus solely on the individual that you're supporting, and when they're talking about and telling you about something that's hugely emotional and personal to them. Making sure that when you're having the conversations, you use verbal cues or visible cues to show that you are listening. You're not distracted. This is especially and was especially difficult, but really, really important when people were working remotely, particularly during COVID, but obviously people are still working in a hybrid way now. And try and paraphrase a little of what you've heard, which is a really great way of showing that you've really understood and listened to what they've said. So really try and make sure that you kind of summarise and replay that back to them. The second principle is around responding mindfully. Now, the biggest thing that we hear when we talk to line managers about their anxieties of talking about this subject with their teams is that they are absolutely devastated that they may say the wrong thing. They're really, really anxious and nervous about that, sometimes to the extent that they don't even say anything at all, which is possibly even worse than, well, definitely even worse than being slightly clumsy with your wording. But it's really important to respond and speak mindfully in these kind of conversations when they're happening. And that biggest thing there is to not jump into the cliches, not jump into the silver lining. So talking to employees, I'm sure you've heard these, maybe you've even said these, I know I have in the past as well, and it's not coming from a place of wanting to minimise someone's emotions and what they're feeling, but it sometimes just comes from a sheer awkwardness. But it's things like, oh, well, they had a good innings, or oh, at least kind of perhaps they were in hospice care, they were getting the help that they needed, or we've even seen in the case of, or even heard of examples in the case of miscarriage, perhaps when their family already has a child, they might say, well, at least you've got your son or daughter. Generally, we would say that please, please, please avoid anything that starts with at least, because you are minimising the experience that that person is feeling right now. That's not what they want to hear. Thirdly, managing silence, really just being okay with silence. When you're quiet in a conversation, you're reinforcing that the conversation is on them, it's about them, it's focused on the bereaved person. It shows respect and shows awareness that these feelings are really, really hard. These feelings are hard to feel at home, let alone at work. And sometimes, you know, it's okay to say, look, just take a minute, you don't need to say anything. It's all right just to be silent. I'm not going to speak, but I'm here. Especially when you're doing this kind of conversation remotely. It can be really awkward, but we just need to push aside our awkwardness and focus on theirs, because what they're going through is going to be a lot worse than the slight awkwardness and nervousness you will feel in having the conversation. Also, if you're happy and embrace that silence, then you're less likely to jump in with a platitude or a cliche that can again then minimise what they're going through. Next is being observant. Only when you really pick up on the details and you really listen attentively can you pick up all of those verbal and body language cues to make sure that you accurately interpret what they're going through, what they're feeling, their emotions at the time. Really, really important to note the details, especially if they're telling you a bereavement, details about the bereavement itself, so who they are, their names, how it happened, any details that they're sharing with you, please do make a note of those, and that helps, so you don't have to ask those again when you might have to, fulfill certain kind of HR processes, etc. But then also, it's really important to recognise that you can particularly say the name of the person who has died. So many people we speak to, when they talk about their experience of going back to work, they say, some people said, oh, sorry for your loss, but they didn't mention the person's name. And actually, I talked about my husband or wife or my child at work lots. They used to ask about, oh, how are they and what's going on, what did you do the weekend? And suddenly, if that person dies, they just don't use that person's name anymore. And that's really difficult for people who are trying to go through that. Respecting emotions. So all of us will react really, really differently to grief, and not every grief is the same, as we know. Even if you've experienced what you might equate as a similar loss, it won't be probably very much like their experience at all, because all relationships are different. And that's even before you throw in the complications and the politics of being at work and having a workplace conversation on this. So we all very much want to fix and help people. That's a natural reaction that we take. But one way I would advise to help is to ask about what current support they're getting. That's a really good starting point. And then that can open the conversations as to what they might need, as in more support from you or your employer. And do try and manage your own emotions in the conversation as well. That can be really difficult and can be triggering, particularly if you've been bereaved too. And it's not about suppressing what you're feeling. It's about pausing to give the other person the time and space in this difficult conversation for them. And then finally, considering perspectives. So one thing that quite a lot of people, again, jump in to do is to talk about their own experiences because they want to empathise with the person, which obviously comes from a really good place, but immediately you're taking the focus off the individual that you're trying to support. You're talking about your own experience. If you want to show that empathy, sometimes we advise to wait for a cue. So perhaps they might know that you've been bereaved and they might say, oh, how did you feel when you lost your mother or father? Then obviously it's fine to share that. But we would advise that you wait for that queue. Okay, I'm just going to touch on this tool we've developed with PwC, some e-learning again to help line managers with these compassionate bereavement conversations at work. So we recorded 3 people's different experiences of going back to work and talking to their boss, to their colleagues after their bereavement. So you listen to their audio story, and then we fictionalized management scenarios based on those stories. And then as a user going through the e-learning, you're asked questions, multiple choice about what you might then say and do in that part of the conversation. If you say the wrong thing, you might be kind of gently guided back. But we found that to be a really useful, safe space for people to almost rehearse these conversations before they go into them in real life. And it just takes 30, 40 minutes. But actually the confidence that you then have to go into those conversations can be a lot higher. So, moving on to Gender Network, and I am conscious of time. What can you do to help? Well, firstly, raise awareness. Make sure you've got, ideally, if you can, senior leaders who are showing their vulnerability and talking about their own experiences. That can be hugely powerful and then just gives validity for everyone else in the organisation to talk about this too. Perhaps you could collaborate with your carers network as well. So we've seen that caring responsibilities do disproportionately affect women, so perhaps you could do something together to raise awareness of this topic. Look at your HR policies. So most organisations do have a compassionate leave policy, but a bereavement policy that refers to and caters specifically for different types of bereavement is best in our opinion and more accessible for people as well. And the number of times that we hear from particularly mothers who have had to go into the maternity policy to find out what the miscarriage policy was, that's a no-no. When you're in the headspace of loss, you don't then want to go into have to seek out the maternity policy and read all about the benefits that you receive as an employee and that time you might spend with your child when you've just lost one. So it's something that is quite common in organisations, but the way that policies are constructed, how they're put together and the tone they're written in can have a really, really big impact on people. And also, is your bereavement policy equitable? So we've been talking quite a lot about DE&I well-being, and it very much feeds into inclusivity, of course. And this isn't specific to gender equality, but bereavement leave allocation is something that a lot of organisations offer, of course. But does yours perhaps differentiate or is only applicable if you have a certain blood relationship with the individual who's passed away? So one example, she went viral with her story and went online because she grew up in a South Asian family and she lived in a multi-generational household. She was really close to her uncle. He was like a father figure to her. He sadly died, and she was, she went to a HR team, looked at their policies, and she wasn't eligible for any time off at all because he was an uncle rather than a father. And then the good news is she was able to have that positive, constructive dialogue with her employer to make those changes. But we would always advocate for not specifying the specific relationship where bereavement leave is applicable. It's about the personal relationship and the affinity that person has had who's close to you when they've died. That's much more important. So I shall wrap that up. But please do keep in touch. We've got loads more to share on this topic. It is hugely, hugely important. We've got our LinkedIn page that we've recently set up in the top right. You can follow that and you can keep up with any free webinars, resources that we're offering, plus obviously information about our programme. We're actually running a baby loss webinar on the 10th of October for Baby Loss Awareness Week as well. We're going to have co-op groups speaking about their very forward-thinking policy in this space. You can sign up for our e-news again to find out more about the work that we do, and again tap into free resources, perhaps around Carers Week, etc. And then if you just want to have a chat with me or have a chat about what you or your gender network can do to support in this topic, please just get in touch. We'd be happy to set up a call, or you can email. Thank you very much.